Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through 145 wild facts about Falkreath, the quiet, mist-shrouded hold of graves and pine trees in the south of Skyrim. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. The werewolf in the jail. In the basement of the Falkreath barracks sits a prisoner named Sinding, a Nord warrior, and he is not what he seems. He is a werewolf, and not long ago he tore apart a little girl named Lavinia while caught in an uncontrollable transformation. He blames it entirely on a ring, one he stole from the Daedric prince Hircine himself, hoping it would let him control his beast form the way other werewolves learn to master their curse over time. Instead, Hircine cursed it, twisting the very tool that was supposed to grant him discipline into something that strips his control away entirely. You may find him pacing his cell, desperate to make amends for a crime he insists was never truly his own choosing. The opening thread of a Daedric quest known as Ill Met by Moonlight. The ring that won't come off. If you agree to help Sinding, he hands you the very ring that ruined him, the cursed ring of Hircine. The moment you take it, it equips itself to your finger, and it cannot be removed through ordinary means, no matter how badly you might want it off. While you wear it, you risk transforming into a werewolf entirely at random, roughly once every 10 hours spent outdoors, whether or not you've ever been bitten by one before, and the transformation will never strike while you're sheltered indoors. The only way free is to finish what Sinding could not, tracking the source of Hircine's anger out into the wilderness beyond Falkreath's walls. A daughter buried in grief. The first time you ever walk toward the Hall of the Dead in Falkreath, you may witness something quietly devastating. A funeral is underway for Lavinia, the only daughter of farmers Matthias and Indara Karelia. The priest Runil speaks the rites of Arche over her small grave, while her parents stand frozen in sorrow. It is only later that travelers learn the truth, that she was the victim of Sinding's curse, a death that never should have happened in a hold already so full of graves. Matthias will later describe the attack himself in halting, broken words, comparing what was done to his daughter to the way a saber cat tears apart a deer. A comparison that makes the horror of Sinding's curse impossible to soften or explain away. Hunting a beast that doesn't exist. To win Hircine's forgiveness, Sinding asks you to hunt something almost mythical, a white stag said to wander an unmarked clearing south of Pine Watch. This is no ordinary deer. It regenerates health unnervingly fast and bolts the instant it senses you, forcing patient hunters to rely on stealth or long-range strikes from the shadows of the pines. Your own quest journal won't even name the creature outright, referring to it only as the Great Beast, and Hircine warns that you're not the only one racing to claim it, since rival hunters are competing for the same prize at the very same moment. Slaying it isn't an act of cruelty here. It's the price of breaking a curse that has already cost one innocent life. When the stag speaks, the moment the white stag falls, something extraordinary happens. Its spirit rises from the corpse, and Hircine himself speaks through it directly to you, introducing himself simply as the spirit of the hunt, a glimpse of the glorious stalker mortals call by his name. He doesn't sound angry that his stag was slain. Instead, he sounds amused, treating the entire hunt as theatre performed for his pleasure. He then sends you somewhere far darker, a cave called Bloated Man's Grotto, ordinarily home to nothing more than bears and spriggans, where Sinding has fled to await judgment from hunters loyal to the Prince of the Hunt. A choice in the grotto. Inside Bloated Man's Grotto, you'll find Hircine's own hunters already battling Sinding and losing badly. 3 of them, an Orsimer woman named Batum Grabar, a Khajiit called Matasar, and a warrior named Hodraid, already lie dead by the time you arrive. A 4th, the dying Khajiit hunter Jakir, warns you with his last breath that Sinding is simply too strong for them, begging you to finish what they could not. Here the story splits into 2 paths. You can side with the hunters and kill Sinding, skinning him afterward for a prize called the Saviour's Hide. Or you can fight alongside Sinding against the very hunters sent to end him, a choice that feels far more like mercy than violence. Hircine's approval either way. What's strange about this whole ordeal is that Hircine doesn't seem to care which choice you make. Whether you slaughter Sinding or protect him, the Daedric prince emerges afterward and praises you regardless, almost delighted that you turned the hunt inside out by defying his hunter's expectations. Choose to kill Sinding, and you walk away with the Saviour's Hide, a light armor piece that resists both magic and poison. Choose to spare him, and the once cursed ring is finally cleansed, letting you transform into a werewolf as often as you like, rather than being trapped by its curse. It's one of the rare moments in Skyrim where a Daedric prince rewards unpredictability itself, treating the entire bloody affair as nothing more than an entertaining game. The tomb. That isn't a tomb. West of Falkreath, hidden deep in the woods near the border of Skyrim, lies the Twilight Sepulchre. Despite the name, no one is actually buried here. It earned its title because it is the tomb of Twilight itself, the place where the last light of day surrenders fully to darkness. It serves as a temple to Nocturnal, the Daedric prince of darkness and luck, and has been guarded for centuries by spectral protectors who never truly left their posts, even after death claimed them. Internal development files for the game even referred to the entrance cavern by an older unused name, Border Wall Cavern, a small hint that this remote temple sat right at the frontier between Skyrim and lands beyond, for far longer than its current name suggests. Guardians who refuse to rest. The Twilight Sepulchre is patrolled by Nightingale Sentinels, ghostly remnants of warriors who swore eternal service to Nocturnal, as part of a sacred trio called the Nightingale Trinity. They continue their watch even though their bodies died ages ago, faithfully guarding the path toward the Ebonmere, having been betrayed and corrupted by one of their very own. What makes them especially eerie is a small detail buried in the game's own data. They are not classified as undead at all, meaning typical detect dead magic will slide right past them unnoticed, leaving careless explorers with no warning before one steps out of the shadows. A door opened by theft. The portal at the heart of the sepulchre, called the Ebonmere, connects directly to Nocturnal's realm, the Evergloam. It can only be opened with a relic called the Skeleton Key. When that key is stolen by a thief named Mercer Fry, the very man who once led the Thieves Guild's Nightingales and murdered his own former mentor to seize power, the entire sepulchre falls into chaos, its sentinel spirits turning hostile and corrupted without their anchor. Restoring balance requires walking a gauntlet known as the Pilgrim's Path, a trial built specifically to test whether someone deserves Nocturnal's favor. What darkness demands. Partway through the Pilgrim's Path lies a chamber holding a statue of Nocturnal herself, and the puzzle here is unlike anything else in Skyrim. An old journal left behind by a previous pilgrim hints at the answer directly, describing how the goddess wants something that cannot be seen, felt, or carried, urging whoever reads it to reject anything material. You must offer the goddess exactly what she desires most: total darkness. 2 flames burn beside her statue, and you'll need to extinguish both completely before the path forward will open. It's a rare moment where the solution to a dungeon puzzle is simply choosing to embrace the shadows rather than illuminate them. A pit with no mercy. Near the sepulchre's deepest point lies a steep, narrow pit that serves as a true point of no return. Fall into it, and you'll land beside the skeleton of a man named Anders, who left behind a final message, revealing exactly how he met his end here. Anders and a companion named Nystrom had originally come seeking treasure, posing as devout priests of Nocturnal, to win the trust of the cult guarding the path. When the two men turned on each other near the very end, Anders murdered Nystrom outright, only to find himself trapped and starving in this same pit shortly after. According to the lore behind the location, anyone who reaches this pit without Nocturnal's blessing will simply starve in the dark, the floor never opening for those she has not chosen. The reunion of ghosts. When the skeleton key is finally returned to the Ebonmere, something quietly moving happens. The spirit of Gallus Desidenius, a nightingale murdered long ago by Mercer Frey, is finally allowed to rest. He reunites briefly with Carlia, his old companion and secret love, telling her his contract has been fulfilled before being released into the Evergloam at last, the realm of perpetual twilight that nightingales consider the greatest honor death can offer one of their own. It's easy to walk past this entire emotional payoff without realizing the full weight of the centuries-long wait behind it. A gift with a price. Once Nocturnal appears before you in the sepulchre, she doesn't simply thank you. She bids you to drink deeply from the Ebonmere itself, declaring this the moment an agent of Nocturnal is truly born. Carlia will then offer you a choice between 3 distinct blessings tied to the phases of the moon, powers built around stealth, subterfuge, or outright strife, each one usable once a day for the rest of your travels. Her words afterward carry a sharp, almost mocking edge, reminding you that none of this was really about honor or loyalty. It was always about the reward you wanted, and she knows it. The ancestor nobody talks about, Denga of Stun, the elderly former Jarl of Falkreath, carries a family secret so embarrassing, he'll only share it after you've earned real trust by handling a smaller, more personal errand for him first. Deep in the town's vast graveyard sits a grave that's been disturbed, and most townsfolk assume a corpse thief is responsible. The truth is far stranger. The grave belongs to Vigar, Dengir's own ancestor, who has been a vampire for centuries, kept sealed away by magic that his family has quietly maintained for generations. Magic that has finally begun to fail. A stolen wardstone. Vigar's grave was bound shut using something called a wardstone, a magical safeguard meant to keep his vampiric hunger contained forever. A responsibility Dengir says his family has carried quietly for as long as anyone can remember. Recently, someone stole that wardstone, and without it, Vigar walked free for the first time in generations. Dengir doesn't ask you to recover the stone. He insists it's too late for that. Certain Vigar has already gone to gather others of his kind. The only solution left, in his eyes, is to destroy Vigar entirely before word of his family's secret spreads through Falkreath. The Throne of Blood. Vigar now rules over Bloodlet Throne, a fortified ruin tucked in the mountains southeast of Helgen, deep within Falkreath Hold. It's no gentle den either. The fort is filled with lesser vampires, vampire thralls and wolves, with gargoyles and death hounds joining the mix if certain add-on content is installed. Vigar himself fights on par with master-tier vampires, treating the fort's central chamber almost like a personal arena where he watches new arrivals fight before deciding whether they're worth his own attention, making this one of the more punishing side dungeons hidden within a hold most travelers assume is sleepy and uneventful. A family's quiet shame. What makes the Vigar story land differently than most vampire encounters is the emotional motive behind it. Dengir isn't hunting a monster for glory or gold. He's protecting his family's reputation, terrified that if Falkreath learns his bloodline harbors a vampire, generations of respect could collapse overnight. Killing Vigor earns you a token reward of around 600 gold, modest by any measure. But the story behind the contract reveals far more about Nord pride than any reward ever could. The town built on bones. Falkreath holds an honor no other city in Skyrim claims, the largest cemetery in the entire province. Centuries of battles fought across this hold, a borderland repeatedly caught between Nord, Orc, Imperial, and Reachman ambitions. Left behind so many dead that burying them all required turning a significant portion of the town into a graveyard. Locals don't shy away from this reality either. Many take genuine pride in it, viewing burial among Falkreath's fallen heroes as one of the highest honors a Nord warrior could ever receive. A city named for death. Falkreath has earned a haunting nickname among scholars and travelers alike, the Hero's Graveyard. The title isn't poetic exaggeration. It reflects centuries of brutal conflict that repeatedly spilled into this stretch of southern Skyrim, leaving behind monuments and graves that locals maintain with quiet, practiced devotion. Many noble jarls and renowned warriors from across Skyrim specifically requested burial here over the centuries, treating Falkreath's soil as a more fitting resting place than wherever they actually lived or died. Even the city's general mood seems to carry this weight, a stillness that feels less like sleepiness and more like reverence for the dead beneath its soil. Shops named after sorrow. Walk through Falkreath's marketplace and you'll notice something darkly clever in the signage. The local tavern is called Dead Man's Drink. The town's food supply comes from a place named Corpse Light Farm. Even the alchemy shop carries the name Grave Concoctions, and the general store doing brisk business beside it is called Grey Pine Goods, named for the very forest pressing in on every side of town. These aren't accidents or coincidences. They reflect how deeply death has woven itself into the town's identity, turning grim history into something the locals reference with surprisingly dry humor. The only temple of its kind. Unlike most holds in Skyrim, which scattered ancient dragon cult temples generously across their land, Falkreath contains only one known temple, Bleak Falls Barrow. It sits in the mountains near the border with Whiterun Hold, far closer to Riverwood than to Falkreath itself, guarded throughout by restless Draugr who have stood sentry since the temple's earliest days. Deep within its halls rests the keeper of the Dragonstone, eternally guarding a stone slab that maps every known dragon burial mound scattered across Skyrim's vast wilderness. A slab that becomes critically important the moment dragons themselves return to the world above. I hold the history books, forgot. There's a curious gap that turns up if you go looking through Skyrim's in-game lore books. Several volumes that catalogue the holds and their reputations skip over Falkreath almost entirely, giving it far less ink than Whiterun or Solitude receive, even though the hold's history stretches back further than most and touches everything from the founding of the Third Empire to the rise and fall of an Orcish kingdom. Based on what we know of the hold's quiet, low-traffic geography, this could simply reflect how little attention Falkreath drew from contemporary scribes, an oversight that feels almost fitting for regions so often overlooked by travelers passing through. where the empire was born. Long before Falkreath belonged peacefully to Skyrim, it was ruled in its own right by King Cuchulainn, the king of Falkreath itself, during a chaotic era when Colovian estates had splintered into petty kingdoms following the collapse of the old empire. Cuchulainn dreamed of unifying these fractured lands, but first he needed to secure his northern border against the Reach. He turned to his most trusted general for this task, a young warrior who would soon change the course of Tamriel's entire history forever. The general who became an emperor. That general was Hjalti Earlybeard, and his campaign to secure Falkreath's northern border led him to the Battle of Old Hroldan. When breaking through the enemy's walls by force proved impossible during an initial assault, Hjalti waited through a stormy night before approaching the gates at dawn and unleashing his Thu'um, obliterating the fortifications outright while his men poured through the breach behind him. This victory gave Cuchulainn the momentum to unify the west and conquer the east. Tragically, Cuchulainn was assassinated soon after, just as he prepared to crown himself emperor, and Hjalti rose in his place under a new name, Tiber Septim. A city that predates Nords entirely. Falkreath's name comes from an Elvish root, though scholars admit they no longer fully understand its meaning. Ancient poetic texts from the First Era mention a people called the Men of Creath, described in one surviving work as having been imported from the north and enslaved by the Aelids as labourers. They weren't Nords at all. They appear to have been an indigenous population unique to this specific stretch of southern Skyrim long before Nord settlers ever arrived, their name predating the very people most modern travellers associate with the region today. The liberation born from massacre. According to one ancient text called the Song of Pellinal, the men of Creath were eventually freed by a figure named Pellinal Whitestrake, who orchestrated a brutal massacre of elves throughout the northern holdings, remembered in the old texts as the First Pogrom, in order to consolidate that land for the people he was liberating. This liberation came at a staggering cost in blood, leaving Pellinal's own hair, once white, permanently stained brown with elf blood by the campaign's end. It's a brutal origin story for a region that would later become known, fittingly, as a land permanently marked by violence and remembrance. The founder, who cleared a forest. Long after that ancient liberation, Falkreath as a settlement was founded by a Nord warrior named Bjarfrud Skjoralmor. According to surviving accounts, he drove out the beastly woodland inhabitants, who called the area home, and physically cut down the great forest that once dominated the region, just to build his settlement, earning himself the title of Falkreath's very first Jarl in the process. It's a striking detail, considering how thoroughly the forest has since reclaimed its place as Falkreath's defining feature, almost as if the land quietly undid everything its own founder fought so hard to clear. A bloodline that ruled for generations. After Bjarfrud Skjoralmor founded Falkreath, his descendants formed the Skjoralmor clan, who went on to rule as Jarls throughout an unstable period known as the Interregnum, the chaotic centuries that followed the collapse of the Old First Empire. They aligned themselves firmly with the Western Kingdom of Skyrim, ruled from distant solitude by High King Svarta, a political choice that shaped Falkreath's loyalties for generations and tied this remote southern hold to power struggles happening far beyond its quiet pine forests. When orcs ruled, Western Falkreath. After the imperial province of Orsinium was violently sacked, it displaced enormous numbers of Orsimer, many of whom fled into Skyrim seeking new territory. A chieftain named Yashna Groyazgu led a large group into Western Falkreath Hold and built what's considered the height of orcish power ever achieved within Skyrim's borders, even reportedly hiding a legendary war drum, known among orcs as King Thunder, somewhere within his stronghold, after it vanished during the original siege of Orsinium. For 30 grinding years, his chiefdom proved a constant, harassing threat to the Nords, who called the rest of Falkreath home. A single combat that ended a war. Yashnag's orcish chiefdom eventually killed the local Jarl in open battle, leaving his son Hugvild to inherit a hold largely controlled by orcs. Rather than wage endless war, Hugvild challenged Yashnag and his champions to an obscure orcish ritual trial by single combat. Remarkably, Hugvild won every single encounter himself, a feat that effectively broke decades of orcish dominance over western Falkreath in one extraordinary afternoon. The town that survived an apocalypse when the Oblivion Crisis tore through Tamriel. Skyrim suffered catastrophic losses to invading Daedric hordes. Historical accounts describe the devastation in Falkreath's region with chilling simplicity, stating that everything between Falkreath and Windhelm was laid waste. The fact that Falkreath endured this apocalyptic chaos and rebuilt itself speaks volumes about the resilience baked into this small hold's long, blood-soaked history. The town Helgen forgot. Long before dragons returned to Skyrim, Helgen sat quietly within Falkreath Hold as one of its only substantial settlements besides the capital itself. Unlike most small towns, Helgen featured both a defensive wall and a sizable keep, structural choices typically reserved for fortified cities. This made it a uniquely important imperial outpost, strategically positioned near the southern border with Cyrodiil, for reasons that would soon become tragically relevant. The first dragon in centuries, Helgen holds a grim historical distinction. It was the very first settlement in all of Skyrim, attacked by a dragon after their long absence from the world. When Alduin descended on the town, he interrupted what should have been a routine execution, turning an ordinary day of imperial justice into the opening moment of an entirely new age of dragons sweeping back across Tamriel. An execution interrupted by fate. On the 17th of last seed, in the year 201 of the Fourth Era, prisoners were being marched toward execution in Helgen, including the rebel leader Ulfric Stormcloak. Moments before the blade could fall on the last prisoner in line, Alduin's shadow swept across the town. What was meant to be a quiet, forgettable execution became the spark for one of the most consequential survival stories in Skyrim's modern history. A captain's last order. Inside Helgen, the local imperial captain made the call to proceed with executions despite the chaos building around them, sentencing every prisoner to death regardless of rank or crime. Seconds later, Alduin's attack shattered that decision entirely, providing an unexpected chance for escape. It's a small but telling detail. That bureaucratic stubbornness very nearly cost the world its only hope against the World Eater before the story had even truly begun. The mead nobody remembers right. A quiet detail tucked into Helgen's ruins involves mead infused with juniper berries, a recipe once made by a man named Vilod. One of the prisoners, Ralof, fondly recalls this drink while being marched toward execution, wondering aloud whether Vilod still makes it. It's the kind of small human detail easily lost amid dragon fire and chaos, yet it reveals how ordinary life persisted in Helgen right up until everything changed. Survivors who vanish from history. Curiously, most of Helgen's named residents are never seen again after the dragon attack, aside from a boy named Haming. It's reasonable to assume they either perished in the destruction or fled successfully to safety elsewhere in Skyrim. Their disappearance from the narrative afterward adds an eerie, unresolved quality to Helgen's fate, a town whose survivors simply scatter into silence once their moment in history concludes. Bandits move into the ashes. If you return to Helgen days after Alduin's attack, you'll find it transformed once more, this time into a bandit stronghold built atop the ruins. The damage from the dragon's assault remains permanently visible, burnt corpses still scattered among collapsed buildings. A randomized bandit chief now leads this group, claiming territory in a town that briefly held the weight of prophecy and now serves only opportunists. A slaughterfish on the wall. Tucked inside the ruined inn at Helgen is a small, strange detail many travelers overlook entirely. An enormous slaughterfish mounted as a trophy on the wall. It's an oddly mundane decoration to survive amid such devastation. A reminder that ordinary life, with its fishing trips and bragging rights, existed in Helgen right up until the moment dragons returned to remind Tamriel of its oldest fears. The Jarl, who inherited power. Young. Falkreath's current Jarl, Siggeir, holds his position at an unusually young age, making him one of the youngest Jarls anywhere in Skyrim. He claims his uncle, Dengir of Stuen, simply grew too old and frail to continue ruling. Dengir tells an entirely different story, one involving imperial bribery and political manipulation, designed specifically to remove him from power and install someone friendlier to the Empire's interests. A Jarl who'd rather hunt. Siggeir openly admits he has little genuine interest in governing Falkreath. He leaves nearly all administrative responsibility to his capable steward, Nenya, freely spending his time hunting and feasting instead. He uses Falkreath's treasury to fund fine clothes and expensive mead, a lifestyle that paints him less as a ruler and more as a nobleman simply enjoying the privileges his title affords him. Bribery, the Jarl won't deny. Perhaps Siggeir's most damning trait involves a quiet arrangement he struck with local bandits, taking a cut of their stolen loot in exchange for looking the other way. Trouble brews, however, when those same bandits stop paying him his expected share. Rather than confronting the moral problem outright, Siggeir simply asks adventurers passing through to handle the bandits for him instead. The Thalmor's favourite Jarl. While most Jarls across Skyrim harbour at least quiet resentment toward the Thalmor's growing influence, Siggeir stands out as a notable exception. He views the Old Merry Dominion favourably, openly acknowledging that they reward their friends richly. He doesn't oppose their persecution of Talos worshippers either, believing those who continue the practice deserve whatever consequences follow their defiance. The uncle who sees spies everywhere, Dengir of Stuen, Falkreath's former Jarl, has grown deeply paranoid since losing his throne. Convinced that Imperial spies infiltrated every corner of Falkreath to engineer his removal. He believes well-placed bribes turned the local nobility against him almost overnight. Whether his suspicions hold any truth or stem purely from wounded pride remains one of Falkreath's more fascinating unresolved political mysteries. A brother's quiet companionship. Dengir doesn't live alone in his diminished status. His brother Thadgir, an old warrior himself, shares his home alongside a devoted servant named Tekla. Dengir sometimes suspects even Tekla of secretly reporting back to Siggeir, a level of distrust that reveals just how deeply his fall from power has reshaped his entire worldview, turning every relationship into a potential threat. The housecarl caught in the middle. Siggeir's housecarl, Helverd, finds himself navigating an awkward role under a Jarl who barely engages with his own duties. Siggeir openly criticizes the guard's performance, demanding wage cuts despite the ongoing civil war, while Helvard quietly pushes back, warning that further cuts would weaken Falkreath's already strained defenses. It's a small domestic friction that hints at deeper cracks running beneath the Hold's leadership. A steward who actually runs things. Nenya, Sidgeir's steward, effectively governs Falkreath in every meaningful sense, while her Jarl pursues leisure elsewhere. She manages tax collection from outlying areas like Granite Hill and handles disruptions caused by ongoing wartime trade routes. Without Nenya's quiet competence, it's entirely possible Falkreath's day-to-day affairs would have collapsed entirely under Sidgeir's well-documented indifference toward actual leadership. Land for those who earn it. Despite his many flaws, Sidgeir isn't without generosity toward those who prove useful to him. If you complete a specific bandit-killing task on his behalf, he'll allow you to purchase a plot of land in Falkreath Hold. The parcel sits beside the lake bordering Riverwood and Bleak Falls Barrow, a genuinely beautiful location that eventually becomes the foundation for a home called Lakeview Manor. A throne that changes hands. Falkreath's political situation isn't fixed in stone. If the Stormcloaks successfully capture the Hold, Sidgeir is deposed entirely and exiled to the Blue Palace in solitude, while Dengeir reclaims his former throne. Should the Empire later retake Falkreath, the roles reverse once again, sending Dengeir into exile at Candlehearth Hall in Windhelm, while Sidgeir resumes his familiar seat of comfortable indifference. The vampire hiding in the family tree. It's worth returning briefly to Vigar, because the detail connecting him to Falkreath's ruling family runs deeper than most realize. He's not just some random ancestor. He's directly tied to Dengeir, Thadgeir, and even Sidgeir himself. This means Falkreath's entire ruling bloodline, regardless of which uncle or nephew currently sits the throne, shares blood with a centuries-old vampire still lurking in the mountains nearby. A letter that opens doors. After the Hearthfire expansion arrives in Falkreath, the current Jarl, whoever holds the title at the time, sends a personal letter introducing themselves and inviting the recipient to pursue the title of Thane. The letter promises a personal housecarl and hints, somewhat conspiratorially, that a choice parcel of land might become available for purchase should one's services prove sufficiently valuable to the Hold. The largest body of water, you'll forget, Lake Ilinalta, sits at the heart of Falkreath Hold, and by most accounts ranks among the largest lakes anywhere in Skyrim. Despite its impressive size, it rarely receives the attention given to more dramatic locations elsewhere in the game. The lake supports the Hold's farming and logging economy directly, feeding both the land's fertility and the quiet livelihoods of the people who call its shores home. A land that forgets the seasons. Citizens of Falkreath describe their home in a peculiar way, claiming it's blanketed by a fine, persistent mist that makes the entire Hold feel seasonless. This atmospheric detail sets Falkreath apart dramatically from snow-choked holes further north, creating an environment that feels perpetually caught between autumn and something more melancholic, fitting for a region so closely associated with mourning and remembrance. Mountains above the snowline. The mountains rising above Falkreath climb well above the snowline, creating a visually striking contrast against the lush green forest covering the lower elevations. This juxtaposition, stark white peaks looming over deep evergreen woodland, gives Falkreath one of the more visually distinctive landscapes in all of Skyrim, even though it rarely gets discussed alongside flashier locations like Winterhold or Solitude. A forest rich with poison, Falkreath's pine forest harbours an unusually high concentration of nightshade, a notably toxic plant that thrives here more abundantly than almost anywhere else in Skyrim. The Hold is also one of the few regions where this particular plant grows in real quantity. For alchemists and assassins alike, Falkreath's wilderness offers ingredients that are considerably harder to source consistently elsewhere in the province. Flowers among the graves. Inside Falkreath's Hall of the Dead itself, nightshade plants and various fungi grow quietly among the gravestones surrounding the building. It's an unsettling but fitting detail. Poisonous, shadow-loving flora, taking root directly among the resting place of the Hold's deceased, almost as if the land itself has absorbed something of the death that surrounds it on every side. The river that never stops. The White River, the longest river anywhere in Skyrim, begins its journey in the southern reaches near Falkreath before stretching all the way to the province's northeastern corner. Its origins near Lake Ilinalta tie Falkreath directly to a waterway that touches nearly every major region in Skyrim, making this quiet southern hold an unexpected geographic anchor for the entire province's river system. 3 mounds beneath the pines, hidden throughout Falkreath, hold are several dragon mounds, ancient burial sites where dragons of old were laid to rest, with at least one resting near Billigulch mine. These quiet, often overlooked locations awaken during specific story events, transforming peaceful forest clearings into the resting grounds of creatures far older than Falkreath itself. A bandit hideout, hiding a bigger secret. Pinewatch appears at first glance to be nothing more than an ordinary farmhouse with crops growing in its modest yard. Look closer and you'll notice something strange. The door remains locked and untouched, despite obvious bandit activity surrounding it. A hidden passage in the basement, accessible only by pressing a concealed button, reveals an entire secret sanctuary that most travelers walk straight past without ever realizing exists. The mine ruled by orcs. Billigulch mine, tucked northwest of Falkreath, isn't your typical bandit-infested cave. It's controlled instead by orc bandits extracting orichalcum from deep within the rock. This detail connects subtly back to Falkreath's history with Orsimer settlement in the region, suggesting that even centuries after Yashnag's chiefdom faded from power, traces of orcish presence still linger throughout the Hold's mountainous terrain. The ridge that hides iron and corundum. Knife Point Ridge sits northwest of Falkreath, home to a small bandit camp built directly atop deposits of iron and corundum ore. It's an easily overlooked location for travelers focused on bigger dungeons elsewhere, yet its dual purpose as both a defensible bandit stronghold and a functioning mine reveals how thoroughly Falkreath's wilderness rewards thorough exploration over quick passage through its forests. A coven hidden in the hills, northwest of Falkreath, lies Glenmoril Coven, a small cave inhabited by Glenmoril witches, otherwise known as hagravens. These creatures hold deep significance for werewolves, specifically since their heads are required to permanently cure lycanthropy through the companion's questline. It's a quietly important location that ties Falkreath's wilderness directly into one of Skyrim's most beloved guild storylines, despite its modest, easily missed entrance. 2 towers and a rope bridge. Southwest of Pinewatch stands a peculiar structure. 2 wooden towers connected by a rope bridge stretching directly over the road between Helgen and Falkreath. Bandit archers keep constant watch from each tower, and a tripwire hidden nearby triggers a boulder trap for anyone careless enough to set it off. It's a small, easily missed gauntlet, built right into the landscape itself. The camp that disappears. South of Pinewatch sits a bandit camp at the base of a waterfall, notable for containing a rare skill book and an unusual detail buried in its design. this camp actually disappears entirely once the Daedric quest involving Sinding begins, only reappearing once that storyline concludes. It's a subtle bit of world design that most players never notice unless they happen to visit the same spot twice. A border crossing with no wall, southwest of Falkreath, beyond a location called Haldir's Cairn, sits a border crossing into Hammerfell. Unlike similar crossings elsewhere in Skyrim, this one famously lacks the usual invisible wall blocking further progress. Adventurous players who've tested its limits report walking straight through the visible landscape entirely, eventually falling out of the game's playable world near the edge of the rendered terrain. The priest who tends the dead. Runil serves as Falkreath's only priest, dedicated entirely to Arche, the god of life, death, and the natural cycle binding both together. He's also responsible for performing every funeral held in the town's sprawling cemetery, a duty that, given Falkreath's history, likely keeps him considerably busier than priests serving in almost any other hold across Skyrim's 9 provinces. A caretaker for the cemetery. Working alongside Runil is a man named Kust, specifically tasked with maintaining Falkreath's massive graveyard. Given the sheer scale of burials this town has accumulated across centuries of conflict, Kust's role likely represents one of the more physically demanding, if quietly important jobs available anywhere in the hold, tending to grounds that never seem to stop expanding. A grieving father's letter. Among Falkreath's quieter quests is one involving a man named Lod, whose house holds a note Dengir desperately wants retrieved before it reaches Imperial hands. This seemingly minor errand actually opens the door to Dengir's deeper trust, eventually leading toward the much darker revelation about his vampire ancestor Vigor, hidden away in the mountains surrounding Bloodlet Throne, the farm named for light that glows on corpses. Corpse Light Farm earns its unusual name from a genuinely eerie natural phenomenon. The faint glow sometimes seen rising from decaying matter in marshy ground, often mistaken by superstitious travelers for restless spirits. Falkreath's farmers didn't shy away from this association when naming their land. Instead, they leaned directly into it, turning something most cultures might consider a bad omen into a proud, distinctive piece of local identity that locals mention almost fondly to passing strangers. A mill that powers the hold. Falkreath's economy depends heavily on lumber, and a wood mill sitting just outside town processes the timber gathered from the surrounding pine forest before it's shipped elsewhere in Skyrim. This detail matters more than it first appears, since Falkreath's dense woodland isn't simply scenery. It's the literal economic backbone supporting the hold's modest population through generations of logging, farming, and quiet trade with neighboring regions. The general store of grey pine goods, Falkreath's primary general store, carries the name Grey Pine Goods, a title drawn directly from the forest surrounding the town on every side. It's owned, fittingly, by Sidgir himself, alongside the nearby Deadwood lumber mill. This means Falkreath's own Jarl quietly profits from 2 separate local businesses, a detail that adds yet another layer to his already well-documented reputation for prioritizing personal gain over the responsibilities of his title. A hold defined by 2 industries. Between farming along Lake Ilinalta's fertile shores and logging throughout its surrounding pine forest, Falkreath's economy stands apart from holds built around mining, fishing fleets, or trade routes. This dual identity, equal parts forest and farmland, reflects the hold's broader character throughout Skyrim's lore. A place of quiet, grounded labor existing in stark contrast to the violent history layered beneath its soil and woven through its graveyards. The Snow Elves' forgotten claim. Falkreath's elvish name hints at a connection to the Snow Elves, an ancient and largely vanished race that once held considerable influence across northern Tamriel. Scholars admit they genuinely don't know what relationship, if any, the Snow Elves held with this specific region in ancient times. It's one of those frustratingly incomplete threads of lore that hints at a much older history buried beneath everything we actually know about Falkreath today. A name that means nothing, we understand. Despite extensive scholarly digging, the actual meaning behind Falkreath's name remains genuinely unknown, even to dedicated lore researchers. Some sources list alternate spellings like Falkreath or Falkreath, suggesting the name shifted slightly across different eras and historical records. This lingering mystery feels strangely appropriate for a hold whose entire identity already leans so heavily into themes of forgotten history and quiet, unanswered questions. The Interregnum's quiet survivor. During the chaotic interregnum period between Skyrim's First and Second Empires, Falkreath managed to persist through repeated shifts in regional power, aligning itself first with Western Skyrim, then briefly returning to the Colovian estates before eventually settling into its modern place within unified Skyrim. Few holds can claim quite this level of political whiplash across the centuries, bouncing between rival governments while somehow maintaining its core identity throughout it all. A kingdom split in two. When High King Logrolf died, Skyrim fractured dramatically into eastern and western halves, with Falkreath falling under the banner of the Western Kingdom, led by High King Svart, ruling from distant solitude. This split fundamentally shaped Falkreath's political alignment for generations afterward, tying this small southern hold's fate to decisions made far away in Solitude's halls of power, long before any of its current residents were born. The city-state that rivaled Whiterun. During the late Third Era's imperial simulacrum, Falkreath existed as its own independent city-state, under a ruler named King Bjeld. According to surviving records, Falkreath maintained an active rivalry with neighbouring Whiterun during this period, a detail that hints at deeper, older tensions between these two holds that likely shaped regional politics long before either fell fully under unified imperial or Nordic rule. Bandits who answer to the Jarl. It bears repeating just how unusual Siggeir's arrangement with local bandits truly is. Most Jarls across Skyrim actively hunt down criminal elements, threatening their hold's safety. Siggeir instead quietly profited from their raids for an unknown stretch of time, only turning against them once his cut of the loot dried up, its corruption hiding in plain sight, dressed up as simple, administrative indifference toward his people's well-being. A mountain pass, without mercy. Travellers moving between Helgen and Falkreath along the main road pass directly beneath the rope bridge connecting those two watchtowers mentioned earlier, often without realizing archers above have already spotted them. This stretch of road, despite looking like simple wilderness scenery, functions as a deliberate ambush corridor, one of several scattered throughout Falkreath Hold that reward cautious, observant travel over careless wandering through what seems like peaceful countryside. The camp that disappeared from the map. Falkreath Hold contains both an Imperial camp and a Stormcloak camp, each positioned strategically within the wider hold. The Imperial encampment sits east-northeast of Glen Moril Coven, while the Stormcloak presence holds ground east of Helgen itself. These camps shift in relevance depending on how the broader civil war unfolds, occasionally becoming flashpoints for skirmishes that most travellers never witness firsthand unless they happen upon the fighting directly. A Spriggan among the ruins. Roadside Ruins, a small outdoor Nordic ruin northwest of Falkreath, holds nothing more dramatic than a single spriggan guarding its weathered stones. Yet its presence here matters for a quieter reason. It reflects how thoroughly Falkreath's forest has reclaimed even the structures humans once built within it. Nature and ancient architecture locked in a slow, patient struggle that spriggans embody more than almost any other creature in Skyrim's bestiary. The tower that watches the gorge. Peakshade Tower, a small ruined Nordic tower east of Falkreath, contains a spriggan lurking within its crumbling walls. Structures like this one dot Falkreath's wilderness in surprising abundance, remnants of a much older Nordic presence that predates even the founding stories told about Bjarfrudskjöralmor. Each ruined tower adds another quiet layer to the sense that Falkreath's forest hides far more history than any single legend could fully capture. A spider in the northern ruins, South Skybound Watch, a small Nordic tower and ruin northeast of Helgen, shelters both bandits and a giant frostbite spider within its decaying stonework. Locations like this scattered throughout Falkreath Hold rarely receive dedicated quests or named characters, yet they contribute meaningfully to the Hold's overall atmosphere, reinforcing the sense that danger lurks quietly behind nearly every overgrown ruin tucked into these southern pine forests. 3 standing stones outside Helgen. Just outside the ruined town of Helgen and neighbouring Riverwood stand the Guardian Stones, 3 standing stones clustered together in a single location. Choosing one grants a temporary boost to a specific skill category. A small blessing many new travellers activate before ever realising the full weight of what awaits them once they step past Helgen's broken gates and into the wider, dragon-haunted world beyond. The Standing Stone of Fortune. Within Falkreath Hold also rests the Lady Stone, one of 13 standing stones scattered across the entirety of Skyrim. Activating it grants increased healing rates, a fittingly gentle blessing for a hold otherwise defined so heavily by death and violence. It's a small, easily overlooked detail that adds a touch of quiet mercy to a region whose history rarely offers travellers much comfort otherwise. A glade carved into the mountainside. East-southeast of Falkreath lies Ancestor Glade, a small glade hidden within a mountain cavern. Its name alone suggests deep ties to lineage and remembrance, themes that echo throughout Falkreath's broader identity. Locations like this rarely attract major quest content, yet their presence reinforces just how thoroughly this Hold's geography reflects its obsession with ancestry, memory, and the quiet weight of generations long since past. Evergreen Grove's hidden pond, Evergreen Grove, tucked southwest of Half Moon Mill, conceals a small pond fed by a rocky stream within a grove of trees. It's the kind of peaceful, easily missed location that rewards travellers willing to wander off the main roads, offering nothing more dramatic than quiet scenery, yet contributing meaningfully to the sense that Falkreath's wilderness holds far more tranquil beauty than its grim reputation might initially suggest. Shrines scattered through the wilderness. Falkreath Hold hosts several scattered shrines honouring different deities, including shrines to Talos and Akatosh, tucked into its wilderness, along with shrines of Arche near Falkreath's own Hall of the Dead. This concentration of religious sites throughout the Hold suggests a population deeply invested in honouring death, fate, and divine protection in roughly equal measure. The mine beneath the snowline. There exists a Nordic ruin called Shriekwin Bastion, north of Falkreath, home to vampires and skeletons sharing the same dark corridors. The ruin is unusual in that it has 2 separate entrances, marked on the map as North Shriekwin Bastion and South Shriekwin Bastion, even though both lead into the very same dungeon. Its name is said to echo the legend of Lamé the first vampire, whose scream supposedly became the shrieking winds that still haunt certain corners of Skyrim, hinting that Vigar's presence in Bloodlit Throne may not be quite as isolated as Dengir would prefer to believe. A sanctuary hidden beneath the road, west of Falkreath, tucked beneath the very road travellers use every day, lies a black pool of water and a door carved with a skull and a bloody handprint. This is the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary, home to the last surviving members of Skyrim's infamous Assassin's Guild. An audible heartbeat thrums from the stone as you approach, as though the door itself is alive and listening for footsteps it doesn't recognize. The question only killers can answer. To enter the Dark Brotherhood's hidden home, you must answer a question whispered by the door itself. What is the music of life? Only members of the Brotherhood know the correct response. Silence, my brother. A password taught by Astrid or later by an Imperial commander hunting the Guild's last members. Answer wrong, and the door simply tells you that you are not worthy, with no further consequence beyond having to try again. A pool that hides a secret visitor. Beside the sanctuary's entrance sits a pool of water so dark it looks almost solid. This is no ordinary pond. During a certain quest, the legendary horse Shadowmere rises directly out of its black depths, a steed said to be born from the very essence of Mephala, woven into flesh and bone. Travellers who stumble across this pool without context might never guess that it conceals one of Skyrim's strangest and most loyal companions. The tomb of a mage who wouldn't stay dead. Southwest of Falkreath, not far from the Dark Brotherhood's hidden door, lies Haldir's cairn, the final resting place of a powerful undead spellcaster named Haldir. Unlike most Draugr bosses scattered through Skyrim's barrows, Haldir doesn't go down quietly. Once his health drops low enough, he vanishes entirely and splits into 3 separate elemental versions of himself, each one a different flavor of magical nightmare. 3 faces of the same old grudge. When Haldir fractures into his 3 selves, each fragment specializes in a different school of destruction, one hurling fire, one wreathing itself in frost, and one crackling with lightning. Adventurers caught without strong magic resistance often find this fight far more punishing than its modest reputation suggests. Once all 3 fragments fall, Haldir reassembles in the flesh one final time, ready to be finished off for good. 3 bandits who chose the same death. Just inside Haldir's cairn, a beam of pale magical light rises from a cairn surrounded by 3 corpses, former members of a gang known as the Knife Point Bandits. According to the journal left beside them, a ghostly voice compelled all 3 to take their own lives atop the bloodied stones. This could imply that Haldir's restless spirit had already begun reaching beyond his tomb's walls long before any adventurer ever set foot inside. A drum worth risking the dead for. Deep within Haldir's cairn, past the ghosts and the Draugr and the spell-casting horror at its heart, sits a simple chest holding Riorn's drum, an instrument sought by a Bard's College instructor named Girol Germain. It's a strange contrast, a humble musical request tucked at the end of one of Falkreath's more genuinely dangerous dungeons, as though the cairn itself doesn't care what reason brings travellers to its door. The fort that decides a war. East of Falkreath stands Fort Newgrad, a stronghold that plays a pivotal role in deciding which side ultimately controls the hold during Skyrim's civil war. Whichever faction holds this fort effectively holds Falkreath's allegiance, making it one of the more strategically significant locations in the entire southern stretch of the province, despite its modest size compared to grander fortresses elsewhere. a legate's burden in the south. Commanding the Imperial Legion throughout Falkreath Hold is a legate, whose responsibility includes defending Fort Newgrad against Stormcloak incursions. Based on what we know of the Hold's strategic position bordering both Cyrodiil and the Reach, this could imply that whoever commands here carries unusually heavy stakes. Since losing Falkreath could open multiple fronts, the Empire can scarcely afford to fight at once. The fort sunk beneath the water. North of the Lady Stone lies Ilinalta's Deep, a flooded fortress crawling with necromancers and the skeletons they've raised to serve them. Half submerged in the lake that gives it its name, the fort feels less like a stronghold and more like a tomb that simply forgot to finish sinking. Its dark, waterlogged halls a fitting home for those who make their living raising the dead. A mill that feeds 2 towns at once. Half Moon Mill, a lumber operation tucked within Falkreath Hold, supplies timber to both Helgen and Falkreath, the Hold's 2 notable settlements. This single mill effectively underpins construction and trade across the entire southern stretch of the Hold. A reminder that for all the graves and ghost stories that define Falkreath's reputation, ordinary industry still keeps the region running day to day. A shack for travellers. Between storms. Northwest of Falkreath sits Hunter's Rest, a small shack offering shelter to anyone caught wandering the wilderness when the weather turns unkind. Modest structures like this rarely earn mention in grand histories, yet they speak to a quieter truth about Falkreath Hold, a place crisscrossed by hunters, trappers and travellers who need somewhere dry to wait out the mist rolling in from the pines. The watchtower that watches the road. The Falkreath Watchtower stands sentinel along the roads leading toward the Hold capital, a structure built specifically to give early warning of approaching trouble. Given how many bandit camps, ambush bridges, and hostile ruins dot this Hold's wilderness, this could imply that Falkreath's people learned long ago not to trust the quiet of their own forest, building towers precisely because danger here tends to arrive without much warning otherwise. A custom carved from cheese and memory, Falkreath's Nords practice a uniquely tender burial custom known as grave curd, in which a fresh wheel of cheese is placed atop a loved one's coffin at the time of burial. Every year afterward, on the anniversary of their passing, the family gathers to eat a fifth of that cheese together, a slow, deliberate ritual that stretches mourning across years, rather than confining it to a single day of grief. A town that remembers through eating. The grave curd custom reveals something quietly profound about how Falkreath's people relate to death. Rather than treating a funeral as a single closing chapter, this tradition turns remembrance into something recurring and physical, a taste returned to again and again. Based on what we know of the Hold's broader identity as the hero's graveyard, this could imply that Falkreath's relationship with mortality is built less around finality and more around ongoing deliberate ritual. Hunters who tame the wildcats. The Nords of Falkreath have earned a reputation for an unusual skill, taming saber cats, creatures generally considered far more feral and dangerous than their smaller cousins, the Sensei cats favoured elsewhere in Tamriel. This could imply that Falkreath's deep predator-rich forests forced its hunters to develop techniques other regions simply never needed, turning one of Skyrim's most fearsome wild predators into something the Hold's bravest residents could occasionally call their own. The hall that used to sit beneath the mountains. Long before the version of Falkreath travellers walk through today, the original Hall of the Dead was kept beneath the mountains, separate from where the hall the player visits now actually stands. Based on what we know of the city's layout shifting across the centuries, this could imply that as Falkreath's population and graveyard both grew, The town reorganized its sacred spaces more than once to keep pace with its swelling cemetery. A longhouse that watches over everything. The Jarl's longhouse sits at the dead center of Falkreath, positioned directly along the main road that splits the town in two. In earlier centuries, accounts suggest the ruling longhouse instead overlooked the settlement from hills to the south. This could imply that Falkreath's center of political gravity physically shifted over time, moving down from a more defensible, elevated position into the heart of the town it governs. Neighbours Falkreath doesn't often mention. Falkreath hold borders. Hammerfell to the west near the city of Elinhir. And historical accounts mention neighbouring settlements like Newgrad Watch to the northeast and a distant outpost called North Keep far to the north. These connections paint Falkreath less as an isolated backwater and more as a genuine crossroads hold, quietly linked to lands and powers well beyond Skyrim's own borders. A mine that started a legend, Embershard Mine, tucked near the border between Falkreath Hold and Riverwood, holds a quiet distinction as one of the very first dungeons many travellers ever explore after fleeing Helgen's destruction. Tucked among its ore veins are a smithing skill book and a useful spell tome. Small practical rewards for what is, for countless adventurers, their very first taste of delving into Skyrim's dangerous underground. A grotto named for standing water, Greywater Grotto, a small cave east of Falkreath, houses nothing more dramatic than levelled wildlife, yet its presence adds another quiet texture to the Hold's wilderness. Locations like this rarely earn dedicated quests of their own, but they reward thorough explorers with extra loot and the occasional skill book, reinforcing that Falkreath's forest rewards patience far more than it rewards rushing through on the main roads. A cave, named for shame. Tucked into Falkreath Hold's wilderness is a cave called Hamar's Shame, its grim name hinting at some forgotten tragedy or disgrace tied to whoever it's named for. Falkreath's map is dotted with similarly evocative names, Lost Echo Cave and the Lost Man's Reprieve among them. Each one a small, unexplained fragment of storytelling left for curious travellers to wonder about without ever receiving a full answer. A siege that nearly ended Falkreath. Centuries before the events of Skyrim, during the Interregnum, the city of Falkreath came under brutal siege from the Dreadhorn clan, an unusual alliance of Reachmen and savage minotaurs. The attackers threatened to burn the city to the ground entirely, and Falkreath's tall walls alone could not have held them back forever without outside help arriving in time. The Jarl who hid while his city burned. During the Dreadhorn siege, Falkreath was ruled by Jarl Jögol Skjoralmor, a deeply unpopular leader who, according to surviving accounts, ignored his own scouts' warnings and retreated into his longhouse rather than face the invasion directly. Based on what we know of his reputation, this could imply that Jögol's failures as a leader nearly cost Falkreath its very existence, were it not for braver hands stepping in where he would not, the daughter who held the line. While Jarl Jögol hid from the Dreadhorn assault, his daughter and Thane, Erika Skjoralmor, took up the burden of leadership herself, leading what remained of the city's resistance. She held Falkreath against overwhelming odds until outside aid finally arrived to turn the tide, a daughter's courage standing in stark, deliberate contrast to her father's failure when the city needed him most. A coronation born from crisis. After Falkreath's defenders finally broke the Dreadhorn clan siege, Erika Skjoralmor was crowned Jarl in her father's place, her courage during the city's darkest hour earning her the throne he had proven unable to hold. This could imply that Falkreath's people, even in a hold so steeped in old Nordic tradition, were willing to set aside strict inheritance when survival itself demanded someone braver standing at the helm. A grief that started a tragedy. Years before the Dreadhorn siege, Jarl Jurgel's wife and daughter were ambushed by a giantess and her herd of mammoths while travelling to attend a royal coronation in solitude. Erika survived the attack, but her mother did not. A loss that accounts suggest sent Jurgel spiralling into alcoholism in the years that followed. This could imply that his later failures as a ruler were less a matter of cruelty than of a man who simply never recovered from what that journey cost him. The city that once wore another name. Long before Skyrim, as players know it existed, an early version of the game series called Falkreath by a different name, Falkreath, when the city first appeared in a much earlier chapter of Tamriel's recorded adventures. The town has carried at least one other alternate spelling as well, Falkreath, suggesting that even its own name has drifted slightly across the different eras scholars have tried to pin it down within. A recipe built from the forest itself. Among the dishes associated with Falkreath is a hearty meal made from local game, foraged greens and cheese, a meatloaf whose ingredients all come directly from the hold's own hunters and farmers. Even Falkreath's food, much like its shop names, leans into the resources immediately at hand, a practical cuisine built from pine forest and lakeside farmland, rather than imported luxury. A mead brewed from roses. Falkreath is also associated with a distinctive cocktail blending rose tea with classic Nord mead, a drink locals describe as a nice way to brighten an otherwise grey mist-laden day. Based on what we know of the Hold's generally somber reputation, this could imply that Falkreath's people deliberately cultivated small pockets of sweetness and colour into their daily lives, refusing to let constant proximity to death curdle every part of their culture. An epitaph carved for a founder. Among the books scattered throughout Falkreath and its surrounding ruins is the epitaph of Bjarfrut's Kuralmor, a written tribute to the very founder, credited with clearing the great forest and driving out its beastly inhabitants to build the city. Its presence in world suggests Falkreath's people have never let their founder's memory fade entirely. Even centuries after his bloodline's direct rule eventually came to an end. A scholar's obsession with the wolf within. Among Falkreath's available texts is a study titled On Lycanthropy, written by a scholar named Varnard Karesen, examining the nature and habits of those cursed with the wolf's blood. Its presence in a hold so closely tied to Sinding's tragedy and the Glenmoril witch's curse-breaking ritual feels almost deliberate, as though the very ground here invites deeper questions about where the line between man and beast actually sits. The city that inspired a fighting game. Long before Skyrim, before even Arena's first sprawling open world, the entire Elder Scrolls series briefly existed as a concept centered on a fighting game, rather than an exploration title. Falkreath's earliest digital appearance traces back to this period of the franchise's history, a strange footnote considering how far removed the quiet, melancholic hold eventually became from anything resembling a combat arena. A forest that never stops watching. Citizens travelling Falkreath's roads often describe an unshakable feeling that the pine forest itself is paying attention, an atmosphere reinforced by the sheer number of hidden bandit camps, ambush bridges, and ruined towers tucked just out of sight along nearly every path. This could imply that centuries of buried conflict have left more than graves behind, perhaps shaping the very character of the land into something permanently watchful. A border hold with two faces. Falkreath, Hold borders both Cyrodiil to the south, across the Gerald Mountains, and Hammerfell to the west, making it one of the few regions in Skyrim pressed directly against two entirely separate provinces. This geographic position alone could imply why Falkreath developed such a unique blend of cultures and histories caught for centuries between imperial ambition, Nordic tradition, and the older, half-forgotten peoples who lived here long before either. A settlement smaller than a memory. Beyond Falkreath and Helgen, the Hold has historically been home to only the smallest of settlements, scattered farms, mills, and shacks, rather than proper towns. Based on what we know of the region's population and economy, this could imply that Falkreath has always remained sparse by design or circumstance. Its true wealth measured less in crowded streets and more in timber, farmland, and quiet, defensible distance from its neighbours. The forest that took the city's name, Falkreath Hold, is sometimes described as synonymous with its boreal forest, the two practically interchangeable in how scholars and travellers refer to the region. This blending of city and wilderness into a single identity could imply that, unlike holds built around a single dominant urban centre, Falkreath's true character has always lived as much in its trees and mist as in its walls and graves. A steward who keeps the roads open. Beyond her tax-collecting duties, Nenya's quiet competence extends to managing disruptions in trade caused by the ongoing civil war, ensuring that goods and travellers can still move through Falkreath. Despite the broader conflict tearing at Skyrim's stability, her work, largely invisible to passing adventurers, may be the very reason the Hold continues to function as smoothly as it does beneath Sidgir's indifferent rule. The custom of naming shops for sorrow, revisited, Beyond Dead Man's Drink, Corpse Light Farm, and Grave Concoctions. Falkreath's general store carries its own death-adjacent flavour in subtler ways, with merchants who speak openly and without flinching about the graveyard surrounding their livelihoods. This could imply that for Falkreath's tradespeople, death isn't treated as something to dance carefully around in polite conversation, but simply another fact of daily business, woven into how they talk about their town to outsiders. A city defined by what it buries. More than any other settlement in Skyrim, Falkreath's very identity rests on what lies beneath its soil, rather than what stands above it. Walking its streets means walking above centuries of buried warriors, a detail that locals have stopped finding remarkable, even as visitors often can't shake the quiet weight, pressing up through the ground beneath their boots. The mist that never quite lifts. Falkreath's persistent mist isn't merely an aesthetic choice woven into the Hold's atmosphere. It's described directly by its own citizens as a defining feature of daily life here. This could imply that something about the Hold's geography, perhaps its lake, its dense forest, and its position beneath the Gerald Mountains, traps moisture in a way that keeps the entire region feeling perpetually caught between seasons, neither fully autumn nor fully anything else. A word wall, hidden beneath the mist. Haldir's Cairn doesn't only hold a vengeful mage and 3 murdered bandits. Deep within its catacombs rests a word wall, one of the ancient inscriptions scattered throughout Skyrim that grant the dragonborn pieces of forgotten dragon shouts. Its presence here, tucked behind puzzles and elemental ambushes, reinforces a pattern found throughout Falkreath Hold, that even its smaller, less famous dungeons frequently hide treasures meant for travellers willing to brave real danger to claim them. A puzzle door disguised as a throne room. Before reaching Haldir himself, explorers must solve a turning pillar puzzle, aligning 3 stone pillars to match symbols carved into the wall opposite them. Get it wrong, and the room punishes you with a volley of harmless but startling arrows. It's a small, almost theatrical trap, the kind of obstacle that rewards patience over brute force, fitting for a tomb built to test the resolve of whoever dares disturb its restless occupant. The gang that gave a cave. Its grim reputation. The 3 bandits who died inside Halldir's cairn, Agrius, Rayan and Vidgrod, were members of a wider group known as the Knife Point Gang, the same name later attached to Knife Point Ridge elsewhere in the hold. Based on what we know of their fate, this could imply that fleeing from rival bandits and stumbling into something far worse than rival bandits was simply an occupational hazard for outlaws operating in Falkreath's dense, unpredictable wilderness. A mine that teaches before it tests. Embershard Mine's modest collection of loot, an iron-rich vein system paired with a smithing skill book and a useful spell tome, serves an almost pedagogical purpose for new adventurers passing through. Tucked along the road many travelers take after fleeing Helgen's destruction, it functions less as a dangerous dungeon and more as a gentle introduction, teaching basic survival and looting habits before Bleak Falls Barrow demands considerably more from anyone who continues onward. A fortress worth fighting twice for. Fort Newgrad doesn't simply change hands once during Falkreath's Civil War storyline. It can shift back and forth depending on how the broader conflict unfolds across Skyrim. Depending on which faction a player ultimately sides with, the fort's occupants and its strategic value to the hold shift accordingly, reinforcing just how tightly Falkreath's fate stays bound to decisions made far beyond its own quiet borders. A lake that hides more than water. Lake Ilinalta doesn't just feed Falkreath's farms, it also conceals Ilinalta's deep beneath its surface. A flooded fortress now claimed by necromancers raising the drowned dead from its waterlogged halls. This could imply that even Falkreath's most peaceful-seeming geography carries something unsettling just beneath the surface, a pattern that echoes throughout the hold's broader relationship with water, mist, and the things that linger just out of sight. The settlements that time forgot. Beyond Half Moon Mill and Hunter's Rest, Falkreath Hold is dotted with similarly modest structures, single shacks, mills, and watchposts that never earned proper names tied to any larger story. Based on what we know of the Hold's sparse population, this could imply that Falkreath's true character isn't found in grand cities at all, but in these small, easily overlooked outposts scattered through the pine forest, each one quietly supporting a hold built more on endurance than ambition. A tower, built to watch the water, the Falkreath. Watchtower's position along the hold's main travel routes serves a purpose beyond simple defense. It gives guards a clear vantage over both the road and the lake beyond, based on what we know of how frequently bandits and worse creatures stalk these same routes. This could imply that Falkreath's watchmen have learned through hard, repeated experience exactly which approaches deserve the most careful, constant attention. A funeral tradition unique to the south. While Falkreath's grave curd custom involves cheese placed atop coffins, the broader ritual extends further still, with families returning to graves annually not just to eat, but to share stories of the deceased aloud over the meal. This could imply that for Falkreath's Nords, mourning was never meant to be a private, solitary act, but something deliberately communal, stretched out across years rather than confined to the rawness of a single funeral day. The predator Falkreath calls a companion. Taming a saber cat isn't a casual undertaking anywhere in Skyrim. These creatures are larger, faster, and considerably more aggressive than the house cat-sized Senche common elsewhere in Tamriel. That Falkreath's hunters specifically cultivated this skill rather than simply avoiding the beasts entirely, could imply a deep practical relationship between this hole's people and the wilderness surrounding them. One built on mastery rather than fear of what shares their forest. A mother and daughter, lost to the same road. The ambush that claimed Hurgel's wife near Solitude wasn't a minor skirmish. Surviving accounts describe an entire herd of mammoths commanded by a hostile giantess descending on the travelling party. That Erika survived this same attack, which claimed her mother, could imply that her later courage during the Dreadhorn siege wasn't entirely unprecedented, but rather the second time she'd already faced down a catastrophe most people never recover from once, let alone twice. A city-state remembered, mostly in footnotes. During the late Third Era, Falkreath briefly existed as its own fully independent city-state ruled by King Beeld, a period of self-governance largely forgotten outside of dedicated law circles. Based on what we know of how thoroughly later Imperial and Stormcloak politics came to dominate the Hold's identity, this could imply that Falkreath's brief taste of true independence left surprisingly little lasting mark on how the Hold understands itself by the time the Fourth Era arrives. A Hold that wears its wounds quietly, unlike Windhelm's visible scars from past invasions, or Winterhole's literal collapse into the sea. Falkreath's deepest wounds, the Orc Wars, the Dreadhorn Siege, the vampire hidden in its ruling family's bloodline, remain largely invisible to casual travelers passing through. This could imply that Falkreath's tragedies were never meant to be monuments. They were meant to be lived with quietly, buried alongside everyone else the Hold has lost across its long, embattled history. A region bound tighter to the past than the present. Taken together, Falkreath's graveyards, its founder's epitaph, its ancient Orc Wars, its vampire-tainted ruling family, and its persistent mist all point toward the same quiet truth. This is a Hold defined more by what came before than by what's happening now. Few corners of Skyrim wear their history quite so visibly or quite so heavily as the quiet, pine-shrouded streets of Falkreath. The Mead Hall that never forgets a debt, Dead Man's Drink, Falkreath's only tavern, serves as the social heart of a town otherwise defined by its graveyard. Patrons gather here every evening to drink, gossip, and trade rumors about bandits, Civil War troop movements, and whatever strange business the Dragonborn happens to be stirring up that week. Based on what we know of small Nordic settlements elsewhere in Skyrim, this could imply that for a town this steeped in death, the tavern functions as something close to a pressure valve, a place where Falkreath's people can simply be alive for a few hours each night. The alchemist who profits from decay, Grave Concoctions, Falkreath's alchemy shop, draws its name and likely much of its inventory from the very graveyard surrounding it. Nightshade, fungi, and other shadow-loving ingredients that grow among the headstones outside provide convenient, if morbid, raw material for whatever potions and poisons the shop's keeper brews behind the counter. This could imply that Falkreath's economy doesn't merely tolerate its association with death, it actively profits from the strange flora death leaves behind. A town where every building tells the same joke. Taken together, Dead Man's Drink, Corpselight Farm, and Grave Concoctions reveal something almost playful buried beneath Falkreath's somber reputation. Rather than avoiding the obvious connection between their town and its enormous cemetery, the people who run these businesses seem to have collectively decided at some point that leaning into the joke was easier than pretending it wasn't there. Dark humor, it turns out, may be one of Falkreath's most consistent and least advertised local traditions. A Hall of the Dead built to last centuries. Falkreath's current Hall of the Dead has clearly been expanded many times over, its interior winding deeper into the earth than its modest exterior doorway would ever suggest. Based on what we know of how many warriors have been buried here across multiple eras, this could imply that the hall's builders always understood their work would never truly be finished, designing a space meant to keep growing for as long as Falkreath itself continued to exist. The quiet bureaucracy of death. Between Runil performing last rites and Kust tending the endless rows of headstones, Falkreath effectively employs a small dedicated staff whose entire job revolves around managing death with the same steady professionalism other towns might apply to farming or trade. This could imply that in a hold where dying has become almost routine, the people responsible for handling it have developed something like genuine expertise, treating grief and burial with practiced, unhurried care rather than dread. A forest that remembers every war. Falkreath's pine forest has witnessed conflict stretching back to the Merethic era through the Nordic Former War, the Orsamer chiefdom under Yashnag, the Oblivion Crisis, the Dreadhorn Siege, and now Skyrim's own civil war. Based on what we know of how thoroughly violence has shaped this hold across every recorded era, this could imply that Falkreath's trees themselves have grown across more buried battlefields than almost anywhere else in the entirety of Skyrim. The hold that outlasts its rulers. Across the centuries, Falkreath has been ruled by ancient Nord warriors, an Orcish chieftain's rival Jarl, the Skjoralmor dynasty, an independent king, imperial-aligned Jarls, and Stormcloak sympathizers in turn. Through every single change in leadership, the hold itself has endured. This could imply that whatever truly defines Falkreath was never really tied to whoever happened to sit on its throne, but to the land, the graves, and the people quietly living among both. A reputation that outpaced the city itself. According to in-world accounts, Falkreath's reputation as the hero's graveyard has noticeably faded over time, even as the graves themselves remain exactly where they've always been. This could imply that as Skyrim's other holds grew louder and more politically prominent, quieter, history-soaked places like Falkreath simply stopped commanding the same attention they once did, fading from common conversation, even while their physical legacy never disappeared. The forest's gift to Falkreath's hunters. Beyond saber cats and the elusive white stag, Falkreath's wilderness supports a wide range of game that sustains the hold's farmers and hunters alike. Deer, foxes, and the occasional bear, wandering close to settled land. Based on what we know of how heavily the hold's economy leans on its forest, this could imply that hunting here isn't simply a pastime, but a quietly essential trade skill passed down through generations of Falkreath families. A quiet rebellion against imperial taxation. Falkreath Steward. Nenya manages tax collection from outlying areas like Granite Hill, a duty that places her squarely in the middle of any friction between local farmers and the wartime demands of whichever faction currently controls the hold. This could imply that even far from any battlefield, the Civil War's economic weight presses directly down on Falkreath's ordinary people, felt less through swords and more through the steady, grinding pressure of wartime taxation. The road that connects death to life. The main road running through Falkreath links the town's graveyard, its tavern, its general store, and its alchemist's shop, all within a short walk of one another, an unusually compact arrangement for a settlement of its size. Based on what we know of how deliberately Skyrim's towns are laid out, this could imply that Falkreath's planners wanted death and daily life kept within constant, unavoidable view of each other. rather than tucked away at a comfortable distance. A town that never apologizes for what it is. Unlike Whiterun's grandeur or Solitude's political theatre, Falkreath makes no real attempt to disguise or soften its identity as a town built quite literally on its own dead. This could imply a kind of hard-won honesty running through the Hold's culture, an acceptance that some places are simply defined by loss, and that pretending otherwise would only make the weight of it harder to carry for everyone who calls Falkreath home. The mist as a living metaphor. Scholars who study Falkreath's persistent atmospheric mist often note how neatly it mirrors the Hold's broader themes, a haze that blurs the line between past and present, between the living town and the dead it buries. Based on what we know of how deliberately Skyrim's regions are designed around mood and theme, this could imply that Falkreath's weather was never just background scenery, but a quiet, constant reminder of exactly what kind of place travelers have wandered into. The lumber that built a province. Falkreath's wood mill doesn't just serve the Hold itself. Timber harvested from its dense pine forest gets shipped out to other parts of Skyrim as well, feeding construction projects far beyond the Hold's own borders. Based on what we know of how heavily Skyrim's other cities rely on imported building materials, this could imply that Falkreath's quiet forest economy props up far more of the province's infrastructure than most travelers passing through the Hold would ever think to credit it for. A Hold that trades in patience, not spectacle. Unlike Solitude's bustling docks or Riften's thriving black market, Falkreath's economy runs on slower, steadier industries, timber, farming, and the occasional sale of alchemical ingredients gathered from its own graveyard. This could imply that Falkreath's people have never measured prosperity the way wealthier Holds do, finding stability instead in industries that simply keep producing year after year, regardless of how the broader civil war or political winds happen to be shifting elsewhere. The witnesses who never speak. Throughout Falkreath's graveyard stand countless unnamed headstones, monuments to warriors whose individual stories never made it into any book or quest. Based on what we know of how many battles have spilled into this Hold across every recorded era, this could imply that for every named hero remembered in Falkreath's epitaphs, dozens more rest here in complete anonymity, their courage and sacrifice folded quietly into the Hold's much larger, unspoken history. A town where strangers are quickly noticed. Given Falkreath's small size and tight-knit population, newcomers tend to draw immediate attention from the handful of guards, merchants, and townsfolk who call the Hold capital home. This could imply that anyone arriving in Falkreath carrying secrets, whether fleeing the Civil War, the Dark Brotherhood, or simply their own past, would find it considerably harder to stay invisible here than in a sprawling city like Solitude or Windhelm. The cycle Falkreath can never quite escape. Looking across Falkreath's full history, one pattern repeats again and again. Conflict arrives, the Hold suffers, graves multiply, and then life quietly resumes until the next threat appears. Based on what we know of the Orc Wars, the Oblivion Crisis, the Dreadhorn Siege, and the modern Civil War alike, this could imply that Falkreath has never truly known a lasting peace, only a series of pauses between one tragedy and whatever comes to disturb the pines next. A forest that hides as much as it reveals. Between the bandit camps, the ambush bridges, the hidden Dark Brotherhood door, and the buried temple to Nocturnal herself, Falkreath's pine forest conceals an unusually high concentration of secrets for a Hold many travelers dismiss as simply quiet countryside. This could imply that beneath its sleepy, melancholic surface Falkreath rewards exactly the kind of careful, patient exploration that its own reputation as a forgettable hold tends to actively discourage. The last word on a hold built from memory. If Falkreath has one defining trait above all others, it may be this: almost nothing here is ever truly forgotten. Founders, fallen warriors, ancient feuds, and even a centuries-old vampire hiding in the family tree all linger close to the surface, waiting for someone patient enough to dig. Based on what we know of every layer uncovered across this hold's long, blood-soaked history, this could imply that Falkreath was never simply a graveyard. It was always a memory, carefully, deliberately kept alive. The bandits who never learn. Despite Sid Geir's quiet arrangement with certain bandit groups, Falkreath hold remains thick with outlaws who answer to no one. Scattered across Pine Watch, Knife Point Ridge, the Rope Bridge Towers, and countless unnamed camps tucked into the pine forest. Based on what we know of how frequently these camps respawn and refill with new faces, this could imply that banditry here functions less like an occasional nuisance and more like a permanent, self-renewing feature of the hold's wilderness economy. A hold where silver doesn't always win. Falkreath's bandits, vampires and werewolves all share something in common. They thrive in a hold whose Jarl shows little real interest in clearing them out unless personally inconvenienced. This could imply that Falkreath's wilderness has grown more dangerous over time, simply through neglect, with threats left to multiply, because no one with real authority cared enough to address them before they took root. The quiet cost of an indifferent Jarl. Sid Geir's well-documented disinterest in governing doesn't only affect Falkreath's treasury and his housecarl's morale. It likely contributes directly to how unchecked the hold's bandit and monster population has become. Based on what we know of how actively other Jarls across Skyrim pursue their hold's safety, this could imply that Falkreath's citizens have simply learned to fend for themselves, since waiting on leadership from the Jarl's Longhouse rarely produces meaningful results. A town that defends itself, not its throne. Despite Sid Geir's flaws, Falkreath's guards still patrol the streets, and its citizens still go about their farming, logging, and trading with quiet determination. This could imply that whatever stability the hold maintains comes not from its ruling family, but from the steady, unglamorous resilience of ordinary Falkreath residents, simply choosing, day after day, to keep their small corner of Skyrim functioning regardless of who happens to sit on the throne above them. A forest that tests every traveller differently, depending on which road a traveller takes through Falkreath Hold. The dangers they encounter shift dramatically. Ambush bridges near Pine Watch, vampires near Bloodlit Throne, necromancers near Lake Ilinalta, or simply wolves and bears further from any named threat. Based on what we know of how varied these encounters are, this could imply that no two journeys through Falkreath ever look quite the same, each path offering its own distinct flavour of danger tucked among the pines, the forest's oldest inhabitants. Long before Biafur's Skjoralmor ever cleared land for its settlement, accounts describe beastly woodland inhabitants already living among Falkreath's ancient trees. Their exact nature remains frustratingly vague in surviving lore, but their presence suggests the region supported some manner of life, perhaps brigands, perhaps something else entirely, long before any organized civilization, Nord or otherwise, ever attempted to claim this stretch of southern Skyrim as its own. A land defined by refusal. Across thousands of years, something about Falkreath's land seems to resist easy domination, from the unnamed beasts Biafra drove out to the snow elves whose connection to the region remains unclear. to the orcs under Yashnag who held 30 stubborn years against Nord rule. Based on what we know of this recurring pattern, this could imply that Falkreath has always been a contested place, never fully tamed by any single people for very long before someone else arrived to challenge that claim. The quiet dignity of a forgotten hold, where Whiterun boasts of dragon slayers and Solitude boasts of emperors, Falkreath boasts of nothing so grand, only centuries of ordinary warriors buried with quiet respect beneath its soil. Based on what we know of how genuinely the Hold's people seem to honor this legacy, this could imply that Falkreath measures greatness differently than the rest of Skyrim, valuing steady remembrance over flashy reputation, and finding more meaning in tending graves than in chasing glory. A hold that asks to be walked slowly, unlike the urgent, quest marker-driven pace many travelers adopt elsewhere in Skyrim. Falkreath rewards a slower kind of attention, reading the names on headstones, noticing the shop signs, lingering by the lake at dusk when the mist rolls thickest. This could imply that the hold was designed less as a checklist of dungeons to clear, and more as a mood to sit inside for a while, a rare invitation, in a game built largely around constant motion, to simply slow down. The pine needles that remember everything. If Falkreath's soil could speak, it would likely tell stories stretching back further than any single book or quest could capture. Ancient massacres, orcish conquest, dragon burials, vampiric secrets, and centuries of ordinary lives lived quietly beneath the same grey mist that blankets the Hold today. Based on what we know of everything uncovered across this single chapter of facts, this could imply that no other Hold in Skyrim carries quite so much buried weight beneath so unassuming a surface. The last lesson Falkreath teaches. Perhaps the most fitting lesson Falkreath offers any traveller willing to listen is this: importance and visibility are not the same thing. A hold can shape an empire's founding, harbour centuries-old secrets, and bury more heroes than any other corner of Skyrim, all while remaining the kind of place most adventurers rush through on their way somewhere louder. Based on what we know of everything uncovered tonight, this could imply that the quietest places often hold the deepest stories, if only someone takes the time to actually stop and dig. A hold worth returning to. For every fact gathered here tonight, dozens more remain scattered through Falkreath's dungeons, books, and half-forgotten corners, waiting for travellers patient enough to keep searching. Whether it's another grave with a story attached, another ruined tower hiding a spriggan, or another quiet detail tucked into a quest most players rush past, Falkreath rewards exactly the kind of unhurried curiosity that turns a sleepy southern hold into one of Skyrim's richest hidden libraries of lore. A hold measured in quiet persistence. If Whiterun is remembered for dragons and Solitude for politics, Falkreath might best be remembered for sheer persistence, the simple, stubborn fact that despite war, vampires, orcish conquest, and centuries of buried grief, people have always kept choosing to live here anyway. Based on what we know of everything this hold has survived, this could imply that Falkreath's true strength was never its walls or its jarls, but the quiet refusal of ordinary families to abandon land this thoroughly soaked in loss. The stories still waiting in the mist. Even after 90 facts in our first half and dozens more tonight, Falkreath has not run out of secrets. Every grave marker left unread, every ruined tower left unexplored, and every NPC's passing comment left uninvestigated represents another thread someone could still follow. Based on what we know of how densely packed this single southern hold turned out to be, this could imply that Falkreath rewards return visits more generously than almost anywhere else in Skyrim, for those willing to keep looking. A hold that asks for nothing but attention. Unlike holds built around grand quests demanding heroic intervention, Falkreath mostly just asks travelers to notice it, to read a shop sign, to listen to a grieving father, to wonder why a particular grave sits disturbed. Based on what we know of how easily players rush past these small, unassuming details, this could imply that the hold's greatest reward isn't gold or artifacts at all, but simply the quiet satisfaction of having actually paid attention. A hold that mirrors its own mist. There's a fitting symmetry in how Falkreath presents itself to the world. Hazy, indistinct, easy to overlook from a distance, yet remarkably detailed and textured the moment someone actually walks into it. Based on what we know of how thoroughly the hold rewards close attention, despite its forgettable first impression, this could imply that Falkreath was deliberately designed to teach a small lesson about judging places and perhaps people too quickly by their surface alone. The quiet weight of every small detail. From a Khajiit hunter's dying words to a steward's tax ledger, from a vampire's stolen wardstone to a mead recipe nobody quite remembers right. Falkreath's smallest details carry far more narrative weight than their brief mentions might first suggest. Based on what we know of how many threads connect back to larger stories once examined closely, this could imply that nothing in this hold was placed here purely as decoration. Every detail seems to be waiting for someone to ask why it matters. A hold that asks to be remembered. If there's a single thread tying together everything explored across both halves of tonight's journey, it's this: Falkreath has always wanted to be remembered, even when the rest of Skyrim mostly forgot to look. Its epitaphs, its grave curd, its careful preservation of a founder's memory centuries after his bloodline lost the throne, all point toward a hold built around the simple, stubborn act of refusing to let its dead, or its history, slip quietly away unnoticed, the last ember of the hero's graveyard. So as the fire burns low and the mist settles back over Falkreath's quiet streets one final time tonight, carry with you the small, scattered pieces gathered here: a vampire sealed in stone, a stag that spoke with a god's voice, a daughter who held a city when her father could not, and a town that simply never stopped tending its dead. Falkreath may not shout for attention, but it has never once stopped remembering. A different kind of treasure hunt, where other holds tempt adventurers with promises of gold, artifacts, or political power. Falkreath's truest treasures tend to be narrative rather than material. A family's hidden shame, a forgotten battle, a grieving parent's quiet grace. Based on what we know of how many of this hold's quests offer relatively modest material rewards compared to the emotional weight behind them, this could imply that Falkreath was built less as a place to get rich and more as a place to actually feel something. The pattern hidden in every Falkreath story. Look closely at the stories gathered across both halves of tonight's journey: Sinding's curse, Vigar's shame, Irika's courage, Mathi's and Indara's grief, and a pattern begins to emerge. Nearly every tale here revolves around someone forced to carry a burden quietly, without fanfare, simply because the situation demanded it of them. Based on what we know of this recurring thread, this could imply that Falkreath's entire identity is built around quiet endurance rather than dramatic heroism. A hold worth. A second look. Many travelers pass through Falkreath only long enough to restock supplies or pick up a quest marker before moving on toward louder, flashier destinations elsewhere in Skyrim. Based on what we know of everything uncovered across these 145 facts, this could imply that those travellers are missing one of the richest, most quietly layered holds in the entire province. A place that gives back exactly as much depth as anyone is willing to dig for. One last look before the fire burns. Low. Picture it once more before we close the book on Falkreath tonight. The mist curling low over rows of weathered headstones. Lantern light flickering in dead man's drink. A priest's quiet voice carrying across a graveyard that never seems to stop growing. And somewhere out in the dark pines, a ward stone still missing. A white stag still running. And a hold still quietly remembering everything the rest of Skyrim chose to forget. A hold that doesn't need to shout. Falkreath will likely never command the same conversation as Whiterun's dragons or Solitude's emperors, and based on everything explored across this entire journey, that may be exactly the point. Some places earn their reputation through volume, others through depth, and the Falkreath has always belonged firmly to the second category, a hold that simply waits, patient as its own graveyard, for someone willing to listen closely enough to hear everything it's quietly been trying to say all along. The quiet that lingers after the telling. Even now, with the fire burning low and these 190 facts laid bare between both halves of tonight's telling, Falkreath keeps something held back, the way every truly old place does. Its mist will roll in again tomorrow exactly as it has for centuries, indifferent to whether anyone is listening, content simply to keep existing, keep remembering, and keep waiting for whoever wanders close enough to notice. Until the pines speak again. For now, let the mist settle, let the headstones rest, and let Falkreath fade quietly back into the dark southern reaches of Skyrim from which we pulled it tonight. There will always be more buried here than any single retelling can capture, and that, more than anything else, is precisely why this hole deserves to be revisited again and again. One last ember by the fire. If you've made it this far, cozy night, you now know more about this small, mist-choked hold than most adventurers ever bother to learn in their travels across Skyrim. Carry it with you the next time your travels lead you south of Whiterun, past the Guardian Stones, and into Falkreath's quiet, pine-shadowed streets, because now you'll know exactly how much history is resting beneath your boots with every single step. A final pine needle settles. That's the whole of it for tonight. Cozy nights. Every grave, every ghost, every quiet act of courage this small southern hold had to offer. Sleep well knowing Falkreath will still be there tomorrow night, and the night after that, patiently waiting in the mist for whenever you're ready to wander back through its gates. A goodbye among the headstones. As the mist settles back over Falkreath's graveyard one final time tonight, it's worth remembering that every name carved into stone here, named or anonymous, Jarl or labourer, vampire or victim, once walked through this same pine-shrouded land, the way countless travellers still do today. Their stories, gathered fact by fact across both halves of this journey, are simply Falkreath's way of refusing to let any of them be entirely forgotten. A dog looking for his master. Wander Falkreath long enough, and a town guard may approach you with an odd request, asking if you've seen a stray dog wandering the roads nearby. He'll point you toward the local blacksmith, Lod, who explains he'd been trying to lure the animal in with scraps of meat. Follow that thread, and the dog introduces himself, speaking in a very human voice, revealing himself to be Barbas, the loyal and famously cunning companion of the Daedric prince Clavicus Vile, the cave where a god waits to be forgiven. Barbas leads travellers willing to follow him toward Hamar's Shame, the same evocatively named cave tucked into Falkreath's wilderness. where Clavicus Vile has been sulking after some falling out with his oldest companion. The cave is thick with vampires by the time you arrive, forcing a fight through Vile's shrine before any actual reconciliation between God and dog can even begin. A reunion that demands a sacrifice of trust. Once you reach Clavicus Vile himself, he makes his bitterness toward Barbas plain, and the only way to truly mend things is to side with the dog and convince the prince to set old grudges aside. In exchange, Vile sends you after a buried treasure, the rueful axe, a brutal two-handed weapon that saps an enemy's stamina with every swing it lands. The choice between a dog and a mask. Once the rueful axe is recovered, Clavicus Vile offers a final, genuinely difficult choice. Kill Barbas where he stands, and you keep the axe outright. Spare him instead, and Vile reluctantly hands over the mask of Clavicus Vile, a helmet that sweetens prices, boosts persuasion, and speeds up magicka recovery, proving that even reconciling a Daedric prince with his own dog comes with very real strings attached either way. A ridge that hides more than bandits. Knife Point Ridge, the small bandit camp and mine already known for its iron and corundum deposits, holds a far darker secret for travelers who arrive at exactly the wrong moment. It's here that a champion of Boethia, the chosen mortal favorite of the Daedric Prince of Deception and Conspiracy, occasionally spawns to be fought and defeated as part of an entirely separate, much larger Daedric storyline, the armor earned by defeating a god's champion. Defeat the champion of Boethia at Knife Point Ridge, and you'll find yourself holding the Ebony Mail, a cursed-looking cuirass that resists magic, fire, and poison outright, while cloaking its wearer in a faint poisonous mist that damages anyone foolish enough to stand too close. It's a striking reminder that even Falkreath's smallest, most overlooked bandit camps occasionally play host to threats with implications stretching far beyond the hold's own quiet borders. A priestess who demands a terrible price. The broader quest tied to Boethia, separate from the Ebony Mail's chance encounter, asks something genuinely uncomfortable of anyone who pursues it. Sacrificing one of your own followers atop an altar, using a dagger called the Blade of Sacrifice. It's one of the more morally unsettling Daedric quests in the entire game, and the fact that its echoes brush up against Falkreath's own wilderness adds yet another uneasy layer to a hold already overflowing with grim choices. The fort hidden beneath the lake. East of Falkreath sits Fort Newgrad, and one of its strangest secrets lies not within its walls, but underneath the very lake beside it. A submerged passage connects the lake floor directly to the fort's prison level, allowing Stormcloak scouts to sneak captured soldiers free without ever alerting the Imperial garrison stationed above. An escape route that turns a simple military objective into something closer to an underwater heist. The reunion of two survivors. Should you choose to liberate Fort Neugrad for the Stormcloaks, the scout sent to coordinate the rescue is none other than Ralof, the very same soldier who helped guide a fleeing prisoner out of Helgen on the day Alduin first returned. Their paths crossing again here, in the very hold where Helgen itself burned, feels like more than coincidence, a quiet reminder that the people who survived that first disaster never entirely vanished from Skyrim's unfolding story. A title earned in Falkreath's name. Successfully capturing Fort Newgrad for the Stormcloaks earns the Dragonborn a new nickname from Ulfric himself, Bonebreaker, along with a weapon and the right to purchase property in Windhelm. It's a small but telling detail that Falkreath, a hole so thoroughly associated with literal bones and graves, ends up lending its own grim flavor to whatever title history decides to hang on you afterward. A fort that changes hands more than once. Capturing Fort Newgrad for the Stormcloaks doesn't just liberate Falkreath Hold, it directly deposes Siggeir as Jarl and restores Dengir of Stoon to the throne he once lost. Siggeir, in turn, is sent off to the Blue Palace in solitude, completing a political reversal that began the moment his uncle first lost power to imperial bribery years before. The opposite side of the same battle. Should Falkreath instead fall under Stormcloak control through diplomatic negotiation, before later being reclaimed by the Empire, an entirely different battle for Fort Newgrad plays out, with Legate Riker dispatching Imperial soldiers from the Falkreath Imperial camp to retake it by force. The Hold's fate, once again, proves to be little more than a coin flip away from flipping entirely the other direction. A name stitched together from two languages. Fort Newgrad's very name reflects two entirely separate linguistic traditions colliding. New, borrowed from a Germanic word for new, and grad, pulled from a Slavic root, commonly meaning city or fortress. Based on what we know of how deliberately Skyrim's place names tend to be constructed, this could imply that whoever first named this stronghold wanted its very title to suggest something foreign and imposing, a fitting touch for a fort that has changed hands between rival factions so many times across its history. Before the war ever touched it, long before the Civil War turned Fort Newgrad into a contested military objective, the fort sat occupied by nothing more dramatic than an ordinary band of bandits, complete with a treasure map tucked away on its rooftop, pointing toward a buried chest elsewhere in the wilderness. This could imply that even Falkreath's most strategically significant fortress started its modern life as just another forgettable outlaw hideout, only becoming historically important once the broader war finally arrived at its gates. A Hold whose war ends in a single battle. According to the broader structure of Skyrim's Civil War questline, liberating Falkreath Hold for the Stormcloaks requires completing only this one battle at Fort Newgrad, unlike larger holds that demand multiple successive conquests. This could imply that despite its long, blood-soaked history, Falkreath's modern military significance pales next to its symbolic and historical weight. A hold easily won or lost in a single decisive skirmish rather than a sustained campaign. A gem worth risking a bandit's wrath. Pinewatch's hidden sanctuary, the same one concealed behind a locked farmhouse door and a secret basement switch, holds more than just bandits guarding stolen loot. Tucked among its treasures is one of the 24 unusual gems sought after during the lengthy Crown of Barenziah treasure hunt. A quest that sends adventurers chasing stolen royal jewels across nearly every corner of Skyrim, with Falkreath's own quiet wilderness contributing its own small share to that much larger hunt. The mask that rewards mercy. Returning briefly to the Mask of Clavicus Vile, its enchantment proves surprisingly practical for everyday adventuring, sweetening every transaction by a full fifth, boosting persuasion in conversation, and quietly speeding up magicka regeneration besides. Based on what we know of how rarely Daedric princes reward straightforward kindness, this could imply that Clavicus Vile, for all his trickery, secretly respects whoever convinces him to forgive his oldest, most loyal companion, the male that poisons by simply existing. The ebony mail earned from Knife Point Ridge's champion of Boethia carries an enchantment unlike most armor in Skyrim, surrounding its wearer with a faint poisonous cloak that damages nearby enemies passively without requiring any active spell or attack at all. This could imply that Boethia's gifts, much like the prince herself, favor quiet, patient menace over loud, obvious displays of power, content to let poison do its slow work while its wearer simply stands still. A hold where every god seems to have a foothold. Between Hircine's great hunt, Nocturnal's twilight sepulchre, Clavicus Vile's cave at Hamer's shame, and Boethia's champion occasionally prowling Knife Point Ridge, Falkreath Hold hosts an unusually dense concentration of Daedric activity for a single corner of Skyrim. Based on what we know of how thinly such encounters are normally spread across the province, this could imply that something about Falkreath's quiet, half-forgotten wilderness draws Daedric princes the same way it draws bandits, vampires and restless ghosts. A wilderness that never runs out of surprises. Taken together, the dog who is secretly a god's companion, the champion who carries cursed armor, and the fort hidden beneath a lake all point toward the same underlying truth about Falkreath, that its forest rewards persistence far more generously than its quiet, melancholic reputation would ever suggest to a traveler simply passing through on the main road. The last word by the fire. After everything, the graves, the ghosts, the vampires sealed beneath wardstones, the dragons that once slept in mounds beneath the soil, and the quiet, mist-wrapped town that somehow keeps living above it all. Falkreath remains one of Skyrim's most overlooked, yet most thoroughly storied corners. Every overgrown ruin and every weathered headstone here seems to carry its own small fragment of a much larger, centuries-long tale. Fragments of grief, ambition, betrayal, and quiet endurance, all settled into the pine-needled earth, waiting patiently for the next traveler curious enough to listen.